Yeah, so we're going to go over, we're not going to talk, we're going to talk about some, like I said to some of you who were here earlier, I have read a ton of screenwriting books. I've made a bunch of short films. Most of my work involves doing community work in Cambridge. And a lot of what we're trying to do, especially with like video work, is you're really trying to sell emotion. So it is a little manipulative, but you're trying to get people emotionally invested in what you're doing. And they do that obviously in the news. People do that in personal documentary. You do that obviously in films and narrative, but it can apply to speeches. It can apply to all sorts of stuff. So it's been pretty fascinating to try to find more and more points of reference for how you can apply these basic techniques. To be honest, my attention span's not so great. So whenever I've learned about story and I've had people show me in more traditional ways, sometimes I feel lost. And so over the years, I've been like looking for techniques that were much more simple, much more obvious to understand. Because I don't know about you all, but with the creative process, it seems like there's infinite excuses to not move forward, and it can get really overwhelming. So my goal here, I'm not saying I'm a master of storytelling. I am also a student. I'm trying to figure it out. But my goal here is to give a few techniques that can help take the teeth out of getting started, making it easier to move forward. Because I think the biggest enemy of storytelling is our own ego and our own preciousness, and it can be really hard to even get started. So the goal is to try to take the teeth out of this. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. So this is the Toastmasters method here. I'm going to tell you what we're going to go over. So we're going to talk about what a story is, and we'll go through the nebulous definitions of a story. I'm curious to hear what you think a story is. We're going to talk about theme, characters, goals, and conflict, so a few basic elements of a story. And then we're going to go over a few really basic story structure techniques. We're going to go over one that's very simple, very 3-act type thing. And then we're going to go over a more intermediate structure that I found even more useful than the very basic one. And then we're going to break off in groups and make pretty unprecious, these stories don't have to be masterpieces, but we're going to work together and we're going to make some simple stories using these techniques. And then if we have time, we can talk about going over your own stories, whether it's a personal narrative or something. We'll go over some brainstorming techniques that I've found to be quite helpful, because even coming up with that seed of an idea can sometimes be really difficult. And then, we'll write our own personal story, something from our lives, but we are not going to write all the dialogue. We're going to write the structure of it, because getting into the weeds, it can be tough. But we'll basically create basic outlines for stories. So does that all make sense? Excellent. All right. Cool. So what is a story? Anybody know what a story is? Does anybody want to just try? It's a hard thing to pin down.
A journey.
It's a journey. I like that.
Life moments.
Yes. Anything else? Great. Okay. Well, I went online. Who knows? It's manipulation. But so I went on.
It's a way of passing on history.
Yes. Yeah. It's a retelling of events.
Excuse me, can I borrow a pen?
I don't know.
Behind you.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm new to this room. So does anybody else want a pen? Excellent. All right. Well, so I went online and I took the screenshot, and there's a lot of weird definitions of stories that actually, all work. We've got an account of imaginary real people and events told for entertainment. Plot or storyline, kind of seems a little circular there. A report of an item of news in a newspaper, magazine, piece of gossip, a rumor, false statement or explanation, a lie, an account of past events in someone's life, the evolution of something. All this stuff is accurate. It's interesting. I have never found a lot of this stuff very helpful in the writing process. So there's more and more best stories. People will get pretty wordy about what a story is, and this actually goes over some similar stuff. But so for the sake of this class, and this is also these are synonyms. I was trying to think of a better way to put it, but in basic, a story is a narrative about a character who must overcome conflicts to achieve a goal. And the character doesn't specifically have to be a person. It can be a subject. It can be an inanimate object. So it can be the Civil War. It can be just some main subject character who overcomes conflicts to achieve a goal. There's that arc, character, conflicts, goal. So it's not a perfect definition, but it simplifies it for me. This is how I understand it.
It doesn't have to be.
All right, when talking about story, so we'll get more into the structure of the story as we get on, but when talking about a story, it's really useful to discuss themes. So when you're telling a story, you want to have people relate to what you're talking about. So having universal themes can be really helpful. So it's very important that a story is relatable for the audience. Using a universal theme can help. So a universal theme is an idea that applies to anyone regardless of background. So there's millions of themes, but some big ones are community, loneliness, love, loss, survival, good versus evil, power, corruption, coming of age, and many more. So sometimes I find when trying to field a story, trying to think about how to start with a story, it's very helpful to come with a theme, maybe something that is emotionally resonant for you. Maybe you went through something recently, joining a community and feeling that whole narrative arc, dealing with love or loss or any of these things. It's a good place to start when trying to hone kind of what your story is, because these are very human and relatable things that will help people get involved in what you do. So, and especially when starting out, I definitely recommend to try to choose one theme to really stick in. And a lot of these themes have overlap for sure, but it is really helpful, I think, to streamline what your thematic content is. So there's obviously, between community and loneliness, there's plenty of overlap. A lot of narratives, if you watch a Pixar movie, almost every time it's about a character who feels lonely and othered and then joins a community and things start to change. So a lot of these story themes do have overlap, but it is good to try to find one to narrow down so you can keep it tight and keep it clear. All right, so here again are some of the popular universal themes. I think you probably all would most understand these, but popular universal themes include love, which are stories based on relationships between family, friends, romantic partners, etc. So this is an endless source. People finding love, people dealing with the trials of love, all this kind of stuff. You can do this from a million angles as you can with all these universal themes. So we've got death, which is something that every human contends with. So yeah, just dealing with the existential fear, grief, the afterlife. I think people, especially in the last few years, have been talking a lot about this existential situation. So it's something everyone has to deal with and think about. And that's a good way to get people into your story. It's try to understand. We've got good versus evil. So it's just a battle between these two things, pretty self-explanatory. Coming of age. So that deals with experiences in a character's life that leads to a loss of innocence or a fundamental change in their mindset, outlook on life. I find myself crying a lot when I see coming of age high school media. I find it's a very emotional time for people. We're dealing with becoming an adult, realizing some of our innocent feelings don't hold water when push comes to shove. It's a very emotional time. So this is a very potent universal theme area. And it's a really good place to mine from our own lives if you're looking to create a story. I think coming of age can be a very powerful place and sometimes painful place to look for stories. But I think the bravery in one's own life can really translate to an audience. If you're doing something that was really tough for you and you talk about that, it can be really powerful. So power and corruption. So yeah, power is a really intense thing. And there's an arc to it. I don't know I'm sure most of you have seen maybe a Martin Scorsese movie, Wolf of Wall Street or Casino, watching people go through these periods of being kind of semi-innocent into this power position, the Godfather. There's a lot of these arcs are really fascinating and scary when you watch the whole narrative, someone become this powerful person who gives up most of their values for that power. I think that can be very, very effective. Survival. So this is a big one too. Definitely very big in sci-fi and horror. And yeah, it's pretty existential as well, just dealing with our mere survival. So all of these themes are these kind of guttural, instinctual connection that we have across all boundaries. All humans, I think, feel these themes. Courage and heroism, which is similar to good versus evil. Prejudice, so dealing with prejudice, having to show a community how to understand what an other is going through. And then individual versus society. So stories about outsiders struggling to fit into society's norm or consciously being rebellious or deciding to be consciously rebellious. And then war, which is a huge one, but something that we all understand as well. All right, so those are the themes. So I find it can be very helpful. You don't always have to start with theme, but I find it's very helpful to anchor your story within a theme. And these are not all the themes. And in fact, again, like some of these are overlapping, some of these are very similar. But it is really good. Finding a word or a thematic thing that you understand about what you're trying to make can be really helpful. And I've heard about showrunners who every episode in a show, they come up with a word that all the writers, they're just going in the direction of that word. Everything's about fear. Everything's about anxiety. Everything's about love. Everything's about betrayal. You know, it's a very effective anchor for really solid and cohesive writing. So finding a theme that works for you, it doesn't have to be one of these 10, but I think that's the point of making sure that you have that direction is great.
You mentioned The Godfather. I mean, some of the best stuff ever usually has several, if not 3 or 4 of these.
Absolutely.
In the, you know, I mean, Michael going from, you know, he was a fish out of water. He was an army kid in the mafia family.
Yep.
And then there was this, you know, tragedy, you know, which is another archetype, and then rebirth, which is, you know, his journey to becoming the Godfather. And
Absolutely.
The, you know, the whole question.
I'd argue every single one of these themes is within The Godfather.
Yeah, sure. And, you know, many other things, you know, many other great stories. You know, Forrest Gump or...
Oh, absolutely. Most feature films will have multiple themes because they have to sustain the narrative for super long. But I would argue that there is one that I would imagine that the writers had one specific theme and then a bunch of sub-themes that were going on that actually all feed into that one theme. And of course you could, I mean, The Godfather is one of the best movies ever made, according to critics and stuff. And you know, it's definitely, as you're starting out, it's really good to keep that focus of trying to find one kind of goal with what you're writing, whether it's to have people empathize with a certain character on a theme or, you know, whatever it is, it's really good to have that anchor. And inherently, because we're human and we're 3-dimensional, there will be other themes that will pop out. You know, I think that the power and corruption of the Godfather is tested through love, through death. You know, there's good versus evil. What is he going to choose? What are the choices he's going to make? Coming of age, you know, just growing up and losing that innocence and becoming more evil. They all feed into that. But yeah, and it's definitely one of the most well-regarded movies. So, but yeah, I would definitely argue with writing, it's really helpful to have kind of an anchor theme that pushes you forward. So, but great question. Excellent. All right, so we'll go back to the elements of story. Are there any questions about theme? It's pretty, you know, I definitely can be circular, but I'm mostly just yelling at myself, like, choose a theme, you know, because there's so many projects where I want to do too much when I'm just creating the infrastructure of how to write it. I want it to be, you know, about love, but death and It can just be really hard to get started. So I would really urge you to try to figure out a great way to anchor what you write. So, all right. So that's what we're going to talk about. That's theme for now. We're just going to leave that over there. But so let's talk about what is a story. So for the definition for this class, and again, it's not a perfect definition. I have not found a perfect definition of what a story is. But a story is about a character who must overcome conflicts to achieve a goal. So that's basically it. So character. So the main character of a story can be a human, can be an animal, can be an inanimate object, a subject, etc. So there's a million ways to permutate this. But for short stories, and especially for beginning out, the more characters you have, the more complicated it can get. So I definitely recommend, while starting out, if you want to get your confidence, trying to keep it tight. 2 characters, 3 characters, something like that. It's really good. And having one primary character. So that's the main vehicle through which the main perspective through which the audience understands. It's definitely a very good way to get started. So, and character, we could talk about character forever. It's really trying to create an empathetic, compelling character. Takes a lot of work, and it's good to have a personal connection to understanding that character for the audience to feel that. But some qualities of a compelling main character are that they're compassionate, resourceful, and strong, but imperfect. I think it's important to see, in order for them to have growth, they need to have flaws, but they also need to be rootable. They need to be likable. So that's an interesting balance, and there could be a 10-hour class specifically on that. But yeah, so basically that's how we're going to find character today. So in a story, the main character should have a goal. In order for the audience to understand a character's choices, they must understand the character's goal. So in Jack and the Beanstalk, the essential, did everybody know Jack and the Beanstalk? So essentially, Jack wants his mother to be okay. You know, he's going to sell the family cow, and she wants him to sell it for money. They're desperate. They need that money. Jack sells it for magic beans. Ugh, what is he doing? And he feels really guilty. You see why Jack would make that decision. Ooh, magic beans. He's just a little kid, but you know, it's counteracting the goal that he had, that his mother has for him. Pinocchio wants to be a real boy. That's a pretty clear-cut goal. They make that very clear throughout the movie, throughout the story. We got Little Red Riding Hood. The Little Red Riding Hood wants to feed her sickly grandmother, visit her grandmother, make her feel good, make sure she's okay. So goals are really important. And if the audience doesn't understand a character's goal, sometimes they're less motivated to continue in that story. So we've got to understand the want, the need, the goal. All right, so we got character, we got goals, and we have conflict, all right? So we've got the goal, we got point A to B. We want Jack to make sure his family is solvent and safe. But there's a conflict. Jack messes up. He goes, he takes the cow, he doesn't get the money, he sells it for magic beans. The mom is so upset. Why did you do that? We're ruined. She throws the beans out the window. And so that's kind of the initiating conflict. Jack makes a choice, and we have these problems here. So, all right, so audiences love conflict. It really makes the narrative compelling. We want to know what happens next. We're like, what's going on? So without conflict, there really isn't much of a story. So Jack and the Beanstalk with no conflict is Jack's family's wealthy and has everything they need. So they keep their cow and relax, the end. Not really that interesting. Pinocchio without conflict. Pinocchio's a real boy already, so who cares?
Or he'll never be.
Or he just gives up, never be a real boy. Well, that's actually even more compelling. There's some conflict there. If he's upset about not being a real boy, maybe the story is that he learns to accept that he'll never be a real boy and just be okay with himself. But you can, you can create conflict in nothing happening. But Little Red Riding Hood, I used LRRH because I was running out of room. I'm not very good at PowerPoint presentations, so I apologize if it's formatted incorrectly. But Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother is not sick and has food, so Little Red Riding Hood doesn't need to visit her and spends the day looking at trees. I don't know, maybe that's a story. But things get really milquetoast, and sometimes I run a short film festival and we get a lot of submissions, and it's really fascinating to see what all kinds of stuff people make. And a lot of from submissions that don't get in, a lot of what the judges say, the emails I get from them is that I didn't care, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what they were fighting, and I didn't understand what they wanted. So I didn't really understand the character. Didn't make me curious. So conflict is a big one. Any questions about conflict? We all deal with conflict and talk about it and try to figure it out. All right, so goal and conflict. Let's bring two of these together. So the goal is what motivates the character. So we understand what the character wants. The conflict is what stands in the way of them achieving the goal. And there can and often should, and more than themes, I think multiple conflicts is a really good, interesting way to keep a story going. So I don't know if any of you watch South Park. I don't really watch much South Park, but there was a documentary about how they make South Park, which is really interesting. They make it in 6 days. And they were talking about the writing process. And when they're trying to develop the story for South Park, they talk about using but then statements. So, okay, Cartman goes to the mall and he just wants to go to the mall to get a new video game. But then an earthquake happens and he can't reach the video game. And he tries to get it, but then something else happens. So these new conflicts keep arising within things. All they wanted to do was walk to the store, grab a video game, and go home. But then, all these new cracks in the story. And it's really exciting and surprising as the audience. Like, how is he gonna get over this conflict, I mean, Cartman, we shouldn't look up to Cartman for sure, but I think the method of but then is really a great way to, instead of and then, things surprise the character on their path to get what they want. And that's what the conflicts are. So you don't have to go too crazy, have a million conflicts getting in the way, but I'm a big fan of comedies, and comedy movies are basically a silly character trying to get something, and then everything, but then. They just deal with a million conflicts, and it's funny because all they want is to just get that one thing, and they're being thwarted every step of the way. So Cool. Okay, so in Little Red Riding Hood, her goal is to feed her sickly grandmother, which itself is a conflict. She needs to deliver food to keep her healthy, the grandmother healthy. So we empathize. The Little Red Riding Hood wants to help her grandmother because her grandmother's gone, she's old and needs that support. So that's the reason for the story to happen. But even on the journey, another conflict presents itself. This very tricky wolf wants to eat Little Red Riding Hood, her food, and her grandmother. So it's an additional conflict. Brings us even further into the story. Any questions about how goal and conflict work together? Great. I made this presentation, so that's all right. All right, so those are the kind of the basics. So we talked about story theme, which is important to anchoring the direction of the story. We talked about a character, conflicts, and goals. So how do we structure this thing? So we've got some basic story structure. So this is kind of the 3-act. This is a boiled down 3-act. It's not as elegantly put as some of the books you'll read, but it's simple. So, all right, so simple structure, beginning, you introduce the character and their goal. So we understand why the story is happening. The middle, the character goes into a new world, so it attempts to achieve this goal, but runs into conflict or conflicts. So there's trials of the character trying to get through and achieve that goal. And then the end, the character resolves the conflict and achieves the goal, or doesn't achieve the goal. So pretty simple. Any questions about that basic story structure? Great. All right, so let's just apply this to Jack and the Beanstalk. Clearly, I'm obsessed with Jack and the Beanstalk. But Jack needs to provide for his mother. His mother tells him to trade the family cow for some money. All right, so the middle, Jack goes to the market to trade the cow, ends up trading for some enticing magic beans. Mother's horrified, throws the bean out the window. And then Beanstalk grows in the sky. Jack is feeling insane and wants to go fix something. He climbs up to the heavens, and he finds a sleeping giant, a golden goose, which he attempts to steal, but then another conflict happens. The giant wakes up and chases Jack, screaming, "Fee, fi, fo, fum." Do not know how that's spelled. And then finally, while the giant is climbing down the back beanstalk, Jack cuts the beanstalk and the giant tumbles to his death. Jack now delivers the riches to his mother and all is well, aside from Jack murdering a giant. I always had questions about this story, but there's different tellings of Jack and the Beanstalk, but the simplified one doesn't really doesn't justify why Jack did that to the giant. I don't know, it's very confusing, but in some I'll just do a quick tangent and then I'll move on. But in some retellings of Jack and the Beanstalk, they try to justify this by saying the giant, that a lot of the possessions that are up there were actually his family's. So that's a little better, but I still don't the murdering element is still not excusable in my moral code. So I would probably rewrite this story in a different way. So anyways, okay, so that's the basic story structure. So we just have beginning, middle, and end, introduce character goal, attempt to achieve the goal, deal with the trials, and resolve the conflict or not, and then they're back in their home world and things are a little different from the journey, all right? So this is our intermediate story structure. So you're in luck because I chose a YouTube video that is going to explain this so you don't have to deal with my voice for a few minutes. But this is basically, has anybody ever read Joseph Campbell's work about the hero's journey? Okay, so he creates this whole, there's this guy named Joseph Campbell.
Heart of Darkness.
Oh no, that's Conrad.
Oh.
Heart of Darkness is wild. Yes, yeah, another Joseph C. But basically what this is does anybody know the TV shows Community or Rick and Morty? So there's a writer named Dan Harmon who is basically obsessed with story structure. And he created this festival in Los Angeles. It's this monthly festival called Channel 101 where people would bring 5-minute videos. This started like maybe 15 years ago. They would bring in 5-minute videos and they would compete and people would vote which videos go forth. But a lot of people were asking Dan Harmon and his partner who started this, how do I write a story? Like, how does the story work? And, story structure is so nebulous, as I've been talking about. It's very confusing. It takes some people intuitively can get it really quickly. I'm not one of those people. And I think that's probably 90% of people are just like, how the heck do I structure this thing? So Dan Harmon spent a lot of time studying story structure and he created this new narrative arc called the story circle. So it has these components as you, need, go, search, find, take, return, change. So these are all put into basically cave person terminology. Just keep it simple. So a character is in a zone of comfort need, but they want something. So we got that goal in there. Go. They enter this new unfamiliar situation. So Jack upsets his mom and goes up the beanstalk. Search. They adapt to it. So this is where the trials happen. They're making mistakes. They're figuring it out. They're getting a little better. There's a montage sequence maybe. Find. They get what they were looking for. Take, but it comes at an unexpected price. It hits in a way they didn't expect. Return. They come back to the original situation or a familiar situation. It doesn't physically have to be their home again or whatever they started with, but they come back to a familiar situation. Change, having changed from their journey. So the conflicts have changed them in a way they weren't expecting through the process of trying to achieve their goals. And now this is when I shut up for a little bit. So this is a YouTube video that I think illustrates this pretty well. So when you're looking for a conflict or a theme or anything like that, one thing that I really go to, you want to find something you really connect with because you're going to write things better that are actually important, not stuff. If you think that something's trendy right now, that can work if you want to get more eyes on it, but if you really want something to resonate, most likely with an audience, you want something that really gets your brain going. So, to find a conflict, what are you obsessing about? Like, I don't know, maybe somebody crosses the street and you just get really upset about it. What I've gotten in the habit of doing is I'm a pretty emotional person, and when I have that, I try to write down, like, what is the seed of why I'm emotional? And then that kind of, for me, gives life to a thematic interest. So I kept thinking, what are the memories you hold on to? I don't think I wrote that down, but what are the memories that you hold on to from your childhood, and why do you think your brain is selecting that as something, even if it's an insignificant story or something like that? I find myself telling my therapist about this one family party we went to, and I don't know why I keep coming back to it, and I'm really trying to mine that and understand what's in that. Why is my brain going back to that over and over again? Because once you figure that out, you're going to be invested in that. It's going to be very personal. And really, storytelling, the more self-discovery you do, the more open and honest stuff you do, I think the more compelling it can be to an audience. So when I'm looking for a conflict, what are the things you're obsessing with, you think a lot about right now? What frustrates you? Definitely with when I'm writing comedy sketches and stuff like that, I think about what's frustrating and I try to find a moment that was frustrating and then heighten it so it's insane, it gets over the top. But what keeps you up at night? What has made you laugh recently? What is something that surprised you that made you laugh? And again, what have you overreacted to recently? Really listening to your emotions when something is big, you feel a great sense of relief, you feel a great sense of love, you feel a great sense of anger, what is hitting that and why is that hitting you? And that's a good place to mine theme and conflicts, for sure. So you can take those things to brainstorm and expand them to a story circle. And it's definitely, so you can take, this slide I should have deleted this slide, but yeah, so you can apply all these structures to your own personal story. So you can opt into doing this or not. I'm going to challenge you to, and you don't have to share these, but take 5 minutes and try to find a part of your life, a story of your life that you can apply. You can create a story out of that is more cohesive for an audience using the story circle. So you can think of a recent experience. I went sailing for the first time in 12 years, and it had a whole arc to it. I was really excited, and then I was terrified, and there was all these things that happened. So you can take something that you recently experienced or something that sticks out. But why don't you let's spend 5 minutes or 7 minutes, 1:35, doing a story circle about your own life. So I'm going to give you all 5 minutes to write. We don't have to share these. I just think the exercise of mining from your own life is a really good place to start. Does anybody need paper or a clipboard or anything like that? Is everybody almost ready? Excellent. Well, great. Well, so yeah. Trying to learn how to tell a story is an endless pursuit, and it's good to have something to hold on to. So let's just review really quick. But definitely, if you're interested in telling stories, giving speeches, trying to apply this stuff, I think trying to mine from your own life is the best way to really work on that, or working with other people. So we did both of those today. Really recommend that. You all created 4 stories today, which is great. The outlines, writing dialogue, learning how to fill that in. That's another pursuit, but getting the structure on the page is really, really important. So let's go over what we learned today, and see what we have. Any questions? All right, so let's see. So we talked about what a story is, and for the purpose of this class, a story is a narrative about a character who must overcome conflict to achieve a goal. All right, so we talked about story theme. We've got all these themes, but you can also come up with themes on your own. These are just big ones that you see all over media. We've got that once more. Character. So a character can be a human, a subject, an inanimate object. Definitely for shorter stories and more early work, it's good to try to limit the amount of characters you have. The more characters you have, the more needs and goals, the more complicated it can get. Unless those characters are two-dimensional and they just serve a purpose of pushing forward that main character's goal, which is totally okay. So goals, the character has to have a goal. In order for the audience to understand a character's choices, they must understand the character's goal. And there's obviously, if you watch more abstract art film, it can be hard to intuit a character's goal. It really depends on genre. But in more universal, traditional narratives, it's nice to see the goal. But a lot of stuff I watch also is very abstract, so sometimes the goal is up to you, up to the audience. So again, all of these are just guidelines for traditional narratives, and there's a million ways to break off of this. But so conflict's really important. Without conflict, a lot of these stories don't have any teeth. They don't keep us asking what's next. So it's good to have conflict, and you have multiple conflicts within the story. Goal and conflict, we've gone over that. Story structure, so we've got the simple 3-act structure, very simplified. It's just the character and their goal. Middle, the character attempts to achieve the goal, but runs into conflicts. In the end, the character resolves the conflict and achieves goal, or is defeated by the goal if it's a tragedy or a comedy. All right, Jack and the Beanstalk, so we talked about that. Story structure, so we worked a lot in the story circle, which takes the 3-act structure and sort of divides it into more point-by-point stuff. So we've got you, characters in a zone of comfort, need but they want something, go, enter a unfamiliar situation, search, adapt for it, find, get what they were looking for, take but it comes at a price, return, they return to a familiar situation, change, having changed from their journey.